The security footage was grainy, silent, and damning. At 9:42 a.m., inside the pristine hallways of St. Jude's Medical Center, a 45-year-old nurse named Rowan Jenkins did the unthinkable. She wound up her arm and delivered a violent, closed-fist punch squarely into the chest of Admiral William Sterling, a decorated war hero and one of the most powerful men in the Navy. He dropped like a stone. Security swarmed. Rowan was tackled. The world saw an assault on a national icon. But what the cameras didn't capture was the microscopic rhythm of a dying heart and the split-second decision that turned a healer into a felon and the only person who could save him. St. Jude's Medical Center in Bethesda wasn't just a hospital. It was a fortress of glass and steel where the VIPs of Washington, D.C. came to get patched up. The air always smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Rowan Jenkins fixed her badge, staring at her reflection in the break room mirror. The bags under her eyes were designer luggage. At this point, Prada quality bought with double shifts and insomnia. She'd been an ER nurse for 20 years, the last 10 spent in the high-stakes cardiac unit here. She had seen it all. Gunshot wounds, overdoses, senators having panic attacks that looked like myocardial infarctions. Nothing rattled her, or so she thought. "Rowan, we have an incoming VIP. Code Silver Protocols." Dr. Gregory Alcott barked, sticking his head through the door. Alcott was brilliant but possessed the bedside manner of a wet badger. "Admiral William Sterling. He collapsed at a fundraiser. He's conscious, combat sportive, and refusing the stretcher. He's your problem." "My favorite kind," Rowan muttered, chugging the last of her lukewarm coffee. When the elevator doors slid open, chaos spilled out. A phalanx of grim-faced men in dark suits, diplomatic security service, surrounded a man who looked like he wanted to murder every single one of them. Admiral William Bill Sterling was a legend. A former Navy SEAL, a frantic strategist, and currently a high-ranking advisor at the Pentagon. Even at 62, with his face grey and sweating, he looked like he could bench press a Buick. "Get your hands off me!" Sterling roared, shoving a young orderly away. "I said I'm fine. It's indigestion. I ate some bad crab cakes." "Admiral, please," the orderly stammered. "Sir, you need to lie down," Rowan said, stepping into the fray. Her voice was calm, the nurse voice that usually stopped drunk college kids in their tracks. Sterling turned his glare on her. His eyes were bloodshot pupils dilated. He was clutching his left arm, trying to make it look casual, like he was just adjusting his cuff. Rowan knew better. That was the classic sign. Radiating pain. "I don't need to lie down, nurse. I need an antacid and a car back to the Pentagon. I have a briefing in an hour," Sterling growled, swaying slightly. "You're having a cardiac event, Admiral. You're not going to a briefing. You're going to a cath lab," Rowan said, moving to take his vitals. He slapped her hand away. The sound echoed in the hallway. The security detail tensed hands hovering near their jackets. "I said back off," Sterling shouted. But the shout turned into a gurgle. It happened in slow motion. Sterling's face went from angry red to a terrifying ash-grey white. His eyes rolled back into his head. He didn't crumble. He stiffened, locking up like a seizure. The monitors on the wall weren't hooked up to him yet. There was no beeping, no warning. Just a man dying on his feet. Rowan saw it instantly. It wasn't a standard heart attack. It was V-fib ventricular fibrillation. His heart was quivering like a bag of worms pumping zero blood. He was clinically dead before he hit the floor. But he didn't fall immediately. He was so massive, so rigid, he stood there for a split second, a statue of death. Rowan knew the crash cart was 30 feet away behind a locked door. The defibrillator pads would take 20 seconds to apply. He didn't have 20 seconds. His brain was starving now. She didn't think. Training took over not the polite hospital training, but the old-school combat medic-style maneuvers she'd read about in dusty journals. Clear. She didn't scream it. She hissed it. Rowan planted her feet. She made a fist, hammered it tight, and swung. Whack! She punched a 4-star Admiral in the center of his chest, directly over the sternum, with every ounce of strength in her body. It was a precordial thump, a desperate kinetic attempt to shock the heart back into rhythm mechanically when a defibrillator wasn't available. The impact knocked the wind out of the bystanders. Sterling dropped backward, hitting the linoleum with a sickening crack. For a second, there was total silence. The security detail stared paralyzed by the violence of the act. A nurse had just assaulted a national hero. Then chaos. "Gun down, get her down!" One of the agents screamed, mistaking the situation entirely. 3 men tackled Rowan. Her face was smashed into the floor, her arm twisted behind her back until she felt her shoulder pop. "I was trying to save him," she screamed, her mouth tasting of floor wax and blood. "Check his pulse, check his pulse." But nobody was checking Sterling. They were all on top of her. "Secure the target. Get a doctor. He's down. The Admiral is down." Dr. Alcott came running around the corner, eyes wide. He saw Sterling on the floor, motionless, and Rowan Jenkins pinned under 3 agents, handcuffed with plastic zip ties. "What the hell happened?" Alcott yelled. "She hit him," an agent spat, kneeling on Rowan's neck. "She cold-cocked him." Alcott dropped to Sterling's side. He pressed 2 fingers to the Admiral's carotid artery. He waited. 1 second. 2. "No pulse," Alcott whispered. "Code blue. Get the crash cart now." As they dragged Rowan away, hauling her up by her dislocated shoulder, she twisted her head back. She watched them rip open Sterling's shirt. She watched the paddles hit his chest. Zap. Nothing. Zap. Nothing. "Please," Rowan prayed, tears mixing with the blood on her lip. "Don't die. If you die, I'm not just fired. I'm a murderer." The room was small, cold, and smelled of stale coffee and fear. It wasn't a hospital room. It was a holding cell in the basement of the facility usually reserved for unruly psych patients, now repurposed by the Department of Defense. Rowan sat at a metal table. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening ache. They hadn't let her ice it. They hadn't let her call a lawyer. They hadn't even let her wash the Admiral's sweat off her hand. The door opened, and 2 men walked in. One was a military MP, stiff and silent. The other was a man in a sharp grey suit who didn't look like a soldier, but looked much more dangerous. He had eyes like a shark, flat black and dead. "Ms. Jenkins," the suit said, sitting opposite her. He placed a tablet on the table. "I'm Special Agent Blake NCIS. Do you know who William Sterling is?" "He's a patient," Rowan said, her voice trembling but defiant. "And I'm a nurse." "He is the architect of the Triton Defense Protocol. He carries secrets in his head that are worth more than the GDP of most countries," Blake said quietly. "And you assaulted him." "I performed a precordial thump," Rowan snapped. "He went into sudden cardiac arrest, V-fib. I saw the signs. I didn't have a crash cart. I had to reset the rhythm manually." Blake tapped the tablet. A video played. It was the security footage. From the camera's angle, it looked horrific. It looked like Sterling shouted at her, and she reacted with blind rage, stepping in and slugging him. It didn't look medical. It looked like a bar fight. "This is already on the internet," Blake said. "Leaked 10 minutes ago. #NurseAttack is trending." The narrative isn't hero nurse saves man. It's unhinged caregiver assaults war hero. The public wants your head, Rowan. Rowan felt the blood drain from her face. "Is he alive?" Blake paused. He studied her face, looking for deception. "He's in a coma. Induced hypothermia protocol. Dr. Alcott got a rhythm back after the 3rd shock. But he was down a long time. If he wakes up with brain damage, or if he doesn't wake up at all, you're looking at 20 years in a federal prison. Assault on a superior officer. Attempted manslaughter." "I saved his life." Rowan slammed her good hand on the table. "Ask Alcott. Ask any cardiologist. The precordial thump is a recognized maneuver. It's an antiquated maneuver," Blake corrected. "Removed from Standard A CLS guidelines years ago because it rarely works and can cause trauma. You broke his sternum, Rowan." "I bought him time. You broke his sternum," Blake repeated. "And here is the interesting part. We looked into your background." He slid a file across the table. "Rowan Jenkins, discharged from the Army Reserve 10 years ago." "Why?" Rowan looked away. "That has nothing to do with this. You were a medic. You were discharged for insubordination and striking a fellow officer. A pattern of violence. I punched a drunk sergeant who was trying to force himself on a trainee," Rowan hissed. "I didn't get a medal for that, I got a discharge. But I was right then, and I'm right now." Blake leaned in close. "The Admiral has enemies, Ms. Jenkins. Powerful ones. And right now it looks very much like someone paid you to make sure William Sterling never made it to his briefing today. Did someone pay you?" "No." "Then why did you hit him in the exact spot that would stop a heart rather than start it?" "I didn't." "We'll see." Blake stood up and collected his tablet. "Until the Admiral wakes up and tells us otherwise, you are a threat to national security. You're being transferred to military custody. You can't do that. I'm a civilian. Not inside this hospital. Not with this victim," Blake said, opening the door. "Pray he wakes up, Rowan. Pray hard." As the door clicked shut, leaving her in silence, Rowan put her head in her hands. The image of the video played in her mind. It looked so bad. But something Blake said stuck in her craw. The exact spot that would stop a heart. She knew anatomy. She hit the precordium. But when she had made contact, something had felt wrong. The Admiral's chest. It had been hard. Too hard. Rigid, like he was wearing something under his shirt. Or like his muscles were in tetany. And then she remembered the look in Sterling's eyes right before he went rigid. It wasn't just pain. It was surprise. He hadn't been having a heart attack. He had been poisoned. And if she was right, the person who poisoned him was probably the one who leaked the video. Rowan Jenkins wasn't just a scapegoat. She was the only loose end. 3 days passed. 3 days of Rowan sitting in a holding cell at Quantico, stripped of her scrubs, wearing an orange jumpsuit that itchy and smelled of despair. She had been interrogated 4 times. They asked about her bank accounts, her ex-husband, her emails. They were trying to build a profile of a domestic terrorist or a hired hitman. Meanwhile, at St. Jude's, Admiral Sterling was waking up. The room was dim. The beep of the cardiac monitor was the only sound. Admiral Sterling blinked his eyelids, feeling like sandpaper. His chest felt like it had been kicked by a mule. Every breath was a jagged shard of glass in his lungs. "Admiral?" A soft voice. Sterling turned his head. His daughter Emily was sitting in the corner. She was 30, sharp-featured, a lawyer for a human rights NGO. They hadn't spoken in 2 years. "Em," he rasped. His voice was a wreck. "Don't try to talk, Dad. You're intubated. Wait. No, they took it out an hour ago. Just breathe." She stood up and poured him a cup of water with a straw. Sterling drank greedily. "What happened?" "You had a heart attack," Emily said, her face unreadable. "At the hospital entrance. It was bad, Dad. You died. They brought you back." Sterling frowned. The memory was fragmented. Pain. Anger. The nurse. "The nurse," Sterling whispered. "The blonde one." Emily stiffened. "Yeah. We know. It's all over the news. She attacked you, Dad. She punched you in the chest." Sterling closed his eyes, trying to replay the tape. He remembered the argument. He remembered the pain radiating down his arm. He remembered the nurse's face. She wasn't angry. She was focused. "Attacked?" Sterling asked. "It's on video," Emily said, pulling out her phone. She hesitated, then showed him the clip. Sterling watched himself collapse. He watched Rowan wind up. He watched the impact. He winced sympathetically at the screen. "Damn." "She's in custody," Emily said. "They're throwing the book at her. Attempted murder. Blake says she might have induced the cardiac arrest with the blow." Sterling shook his head slowly. "No." "Dad, look at the video." "I felt it." Sterling wheezed. "Before she hit me, the lights went out before the hit. My heart, it stopped. I felt the drop." He looked at his daughter with intense blue eyes. "She didn't stop my heart. She jump-started it." Emily frowned. "The doctors say your sternum is fractured. Blake says it was excessive force." "Blake is a bureaucrat," Sterling grunted, trying to sit up and failing. "I need to see her." "You can't. She's at Quantico." "Then get me my JAG officer. Get me David Ross." "Dad, you need to rest. I need to know why I'm alive." Sterling's voice rose, triggering a coughing fit. The monitors sped up. "And I need to know why my chest felt like it was on fire before I got to the hospital. The crab cakes. They tasted metallic." Emily froze. "Metallic, like copper pennies," Sterling said, sinking back into the pillow. "I thought it was just bad seafood. But get me the toxicology report. Not the one they showed the press. The real one." "Dad, are you saying someone tried to poison you?" Sterling looked at the ceiling. "I was investigating the Trident contract, $2 billion in misappropriated naval funds. I had the evidence in my briefcase." He looked around the room. "Where is my briefcase?" Emily looked at the empty chair where his personal effects should have been. "Security took it. Agent Blake took it for safekeeping." Sterling's face went pale. "Blake took it?" "Yes, he said it was evidence." "Emily," Sterling said, his voice deadly serious, "you need to get that nurse out of jail. Because if Blake has the briefcase, that nurse isn't the villain. She's the only other person who saw me die. And she's the only one who can prove it wasn't natural." "How?" "Because," Sterling tapped his chest, "when she hit me, I gasped. I inhaled. If I had been poisoned with succinylcholine or a paralyzing agent, there would be trace amounts in my lungs from that gasp. But only if they check for it now." "They won't check," Emily realized. They're treating it as a heart attack caused by blunt force trauma. Exactly, Sterling said. They're framing her to cover up a murder attempt, and she's sitting in a cell waiting for me to die. The Naval Consolidated Brig at Quantico was designed to break people. It was a labyrinth of grey concrete and echoless hallways, stripped of colour and comfort. For Rowan Jenkins, a woman whose life was defined by the chaotic warmth of an ER, the silence was the worst part. It was heavy, suffocating, and punctuated only by the clanging of heavy steel doors. She had been awake for 30 hours. Every time she dozed off, the image of Admiral Sterling's eyes rolling back into his head jerked her awake. Did I kill him? The question gnawed at her sanity. Blake's voice kept looping in her head. You broke his sternum. You stopped his heart. The heavy lock on her cell door tumbled with a sound like a gunshot. Rowan flinched, pulling her knees to her chest on the narrow cot. Jenkins, lawyer, the guard grunted, not making eye contact. Rowan frowned. I didn't call a lawyer. I can't afford one. It's not yours, the guard said, stepping aside. A woman stepped into the cell. She was dressed in a sharp navy power suit that looked out of place against the peeling paint. She carried a leather briefcase and an air of absolute authority, though her eyes betrayed a sleepless exhaustion that mirrored Rowan's own. Rowan recognized her from the news. This was Emily Sterling, the Admiral's daughter, the shark from the ACLU. Rowan stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. If you're here to serve me with a wrongful death suit, you can save the paper. I don't have anything. I rent my apartment. I drive a 2018 Honda. Emily didn't speak immediately. She waited for the guard to leave and the door to clang shut. She waited another 10 seconds, staring at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. My father is alive, Emily said softly. Rowan let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 days. Her legs gave out, and she sat back down on the cot, burying her face in her hands. Oh, thank God. Thank God. He's awake, Emily continued, her voice devoid of the anger Rowan expected. He's fractured, bruised and breathing. And he sent me here. Rowan looked up, wiping her eyes. He wants an apology. He can have it. I'm sorry I hurt him. I was just trying. He doesn't want an apology. Emily cut her off. She pulled a metal folding chair from the wall and sat directly across from Rowan, their knees almost touching. He wants to know about the resistance. The what? When you hit him, Emily whispered, leaning in so her mouth was shielded from the camera's direct line of sight. He said you told the investigators his chest felt wrong, too hard, rigid. Rowan nodded slowly, her nurse's brain engaging again. Yes, it was odd. Usually when someone drops from a cardiac event, they're dead weight, flaccid. Muscle tone vanishes instantly. But when I prepped for the thump, his pectoral muscles were rock hard, like he was flexing. But he was unconscious. Tetany, Emily said. Excuse me. Muscle tetany. Involuntary contraction, Emily said. My father remembers eating crab cakes about 30 minutes before the incident. He said they tasted metallic, like copper. Rowan's eyes widened. The pieces slammed together in her mind like a car crash. The rigidity, the rapid onset. The seizure look that wasn't quite a seizure. The metallic taste. Succinylcholine, Rowan breathed. What? It's a paralytic, Rowan said, her voice rising in excitement before she caught herself and lowered it to a hush. We use it for intubation. It paralyzes the muscles, so we can get a tube down the throat. But in high doses, or if someone has a specific enzyme deficiency, it causes total body lockdown. Fasciculations. The muscles fire uncontrollably before they paralysis. It mimics a seizure. It stops the diaphragm. It stops the heart. Would it show up in an autopsy? Emily asked. It metabolizes in minutes, Rowan said, the horror dawning on her. It breaks down into succinic acid and choline, which are naturally occurring in the body. Unless you look for it immediately, it's the perfect murder weapon. It looks like a massive heart attack. And the punch. Rowan looked at her own hand, bruised and swollen. If his heart had stopped because of the paralytic clamping down on it, the precordial thump provides a massive kinetic shock. It might have been just enough to break the tetany for a split second, enough to let the node fire one last time before the doctors got there with the epinephrine. Rowan looked at Emily, her eyes wide. I didn't just restart his heart. I physically forced it to beat against the poison. Emily sat back, her face pale. Blake took his briefcase. He took the evidence my father was carrying. And he has the toxicology reports. Blake, the NCIS agent, the one running the investigation. He was the one who told me I killed him, Rowan said. He was the one who told me the thump was antiquated and illegal. He's been trying to get me to confess to assault for 3 days. He's burying it, Emily said, her voice hardening. He's framing you for the assault to cover up the fact that someone had tried to assassinate a 4-star admiral on American soil. Suddenly, the lock on the door buzzed loudly. The heavy steel door swung open. Agent Blake stood there. He wasn't smiling. He held a coffee cup in one hand and a file in the other. He looked at Emily, then at Rowan. Ms. Sterling, Blake said, his voice smooth like oil on pavement. I wasn't aware you were counsel of record for the prisoner. I thought you were here to give a victim impact statement. I am her attorney, Emily lied effortlessly, standing up and smoothing her skirt. And as such, this conversation is privileged. You are violating her Sixth Amendment rights by monitoring this room. Blake chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. This isn't a criminal court, Emily. It's a military inquiry regarding national security. Rights are flexible here. He stepped into the cell, filling the small space with a menacing energy. He dropped the file on the cot next to Rowan. The Admiral is awake, Blake said, watching Rowan's reaction. But he's confused. Hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. He's babbling about conspiracies and crab cakes. It's sad, really. The dementia of a great man. He's not senile, Rowan said, standing up to face him. He was poisoned. Blake's expression didn't change, but the air in the room grew instantly colder. That's a very dangerous accusation, Ms. Jenkins. Unsubstantiated. Reckless. The kind of accusation that gets people put in very deep, dark holes for a very long time. Where is the toxicology report? Emily demanded. The raw data, not the summary. Classified, Blake said. Part of the ongoing investigation into the assault. I want an independent medical examiner to see him, Emily said. Today. The Admiral is in a secure military wing at St. Jude's, Blake said. No visitors, no outside doctors. We can't risk another attack. Can we? He turned to Rowan. You have a choice, Rowan. You plead guilty to aggravated assault. We give you time served and probation. You lose your nursing license, but you go home to your cat and your quiet life. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, and this all goes away. And if I don't? Rowan asked. Then we charge you with attempted murder, Blake said. We bring up your military discharge. We paint you as an unstable, violent woman who snapped. And when the Admiral dies from complications of his condition, we charge you with capital murder." Emily stepped between Blake and Rowan. "Get out." Blake smirked. "You have 1 hour to decide. After that, the offer expires. And Emily, if you try to see your father again without my clearance, I'll have you disbarred for interfering in a federal investigation." Blake turned and walked out the door, slamming shut with a finality that shook the walls. Rowan sank onto the cot. "He's going to kill him," she whispered. "If the Admiral is the only witness, and Blake controls the hospital room, he's going to finish the job." "He can't just kill an Admiral in a hospital," Emily said, though she didn't sound convinced. "He doesn't have to shoot him." Rowan said, her mind racing. "He just has to wait, or push a button. A little too much morphine, a little too much potassium, a complication. It happens all the time." Rowan looked at Emily. The fear was gone, replaced by the cold, hard resolve that had kept her going through 20 years of trauma care. "We have to get him out of there," Rowan said. "Out of St. Jude's. It's a fortress. Blake has agents at every door." "I worked there for 10 years, Rowan said. "I know that building better than the architects. I know the service elevators. I know the tunnel to the laundry facility. I know how to override the mag locks on the ICU doors." "Rowan, you're in prison," Emily pointed out. "And you're his lawyer," Rowan said. "You can't get me out, but you can get yourself in, and you can get something else in." "What?" "A second opinion," Rowan said. "I need you to get my phone. It's in my personal effects. I need you to call Dr. Alcott. He's an ass, but he's honest. And he hates being told what to do by the government." "Alcott is the one who called the code," Emily said. "Exactly. If you tell Alcott that Blake is suppressing medical data, that Blake is telling him how to treat his patient, Alcott will burn the building down out of spite. He's the chief of cardiology. Blake can't bar him from the patient. And what do I tell Alcott? Tell him to run a specific blood test, not a standard tox screen. Tell him to test for plasma cholinesterase activity. It's the only marker that stays low after succinylcholine exposure." Emily nodded, her mind working. "Okay, I can do that. But that just proves the poison. It doesn't save him if Blake decides to act tonight." "That's why you need to get me out on bail," Rowan said. "I can't, not with the charges Blake is threatening." "You don't need to get me out legally," Rowan said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You said you're a human rights lawyer, right? You sue governments." "Yes." "Then stop playing defense," Rowan said. "Blake wants a media circus. Give him one. Call a press conference, right now, on the steps of the Brigadier. Tell the world that Admiral Sterling claims he was poisoned, and the government is hiding it. Tell them the nurse is a whistleblower, not an attacker. That will make Blake furious." "Good," Rowan said, a dangerous glint in her eye. "When people are furious, they make mistakes. Blake is arrogant. If you light a fire under him, he'll rush to silence the Admiral. He'll go to the hospital tonight. And then, Rowan said, we catch him in the act. I'm not staying in this cell, Emily, Rowan said. I saved his life once. I'm going to do it again. But I need you to create the distraction." Emily looked at the nurse. She saw the bruises, the exhaustion, but also the unbreakable steel spine of a woman who dealt with life and death before breakfast. "Okay," Emily said, standing up. "I'll start the fire. You be ready." Emily banged on the door. "Guard, my client is done." As Emily left, she slipped a small paperclip-thin piece of metal from her file folder onto the cot. It wasn't a key. It was a SIM card removal tool, useless for a lock. But Rowan had asked for it with her eyes. Rowan picked it up. She didn't need to pick the lock. She needed to short the electronic keypad from the inside panel. It was an old trick an orderly had shown her once when a psych patient locked themselves in a secure wing. Rowan Jenkins wasn't just a nurse. She was a problem solver, and tonight the problem was a locked door, and the solution was waiting at St. Jude's. The drama was no longer about a punch, it was about a war, and the nurse had just drafted herself back into active duty. The rain in Washington, D.C. was torrential. A grey sheet that turned the streets into rivers. Outside the Naval Consolidated Brig, a sea of umbrellas bobbed in the wind. Emily Sterling stood on a makeshift podium, shielded only by a flimsy raincoat. The red lights of 20 cameras glared at her. "My name is Emily Sterling," she shouted over the thunder. "I am the daughter of Admiral William Sterling, and I am here to tell you that the United States government is holding an innocent woman hostage to cover up an assassination." The murmur of the press corps turned into a roar. "Rowan Jenkins did not assault my father." Emily continued, her voice trembling with adrenaline. She identified a lethal dose of succinylcholine, a paralytic poison in his system. Her punch was a desperate, life-saving precordial thump that kept his heart beating long enough for paramedics to arrive. The man inside that hospital isn't a victim of elder abuse. He is the victim of a hit. Inside the brig, the broadcast played on a small TV in the guard station. The two MPs on duty stared at the screen, jaws slack. "Is she serious?" one guard asked. "Poison." Down the hall in the holding cell, Rowan Jenkins was moving. Emily had bought her the distraction, but the SIM card tool was her ticket. The electronic lock on the cell door was a standard-issue keypad model. Rowan knew from a former boyfriend who worked in security that these older models had a flaw. If you shorted the circuit behind the 7 key, the system would reboot. During a reboot for safety reasons, the magnetic lock disengaged for exactly 3 seconds. It was a gamble, a massive one. Rowan jammed the thin metal tool into the crevice of the keypad. She dug until she felt resistance, then twisted. A spark popped, stinging her finger. The keypad went dark. The red light flickered. Click. The heavy bolt retracted. Rowan didn't hesitate. She pushed the door open and slipped into the corridor in her socks. She could hear the guards arguing about the news report 50 feet away. She needed a uniform. She ducked into the laundry closet she had spotted during her intake. Inside, hampers of dirty linens were piled high. She stripped off her orange jumpsuit, shivering in the cold air, and grabbed a grey maintenance coverall from a hook. It was 3 sizes too big, smelling of bleach and sweat, but it was anonymous. She pulled a baseball cap low over her eyes and grabbed a mop bucket. Head down, shoulders slumped. Just the cleaning lady. She pushed the bucket into the hallway. The wheels squeaked. The guards looked up. "Hey!" one shouted. Rowan froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You can't be mopping now, we got a situation," the guard yelled, gesturing at the TV. "Go back to the break room." "Yes, sir," Rowan mumbled, turning the bucket around. She walked, didn't run toward the service exit. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely grip the handle. She pushed through the double doors and into the pouring rain. She was out, but she wasn't free. She had no phone, no car, and no money, and she knew exactly where Agent Blake was heading. If Emily's press conference had worked, Blake would be panicked. He couldn't let the independent tox screen happen. He couldn't let Alcott find the succinic acid metabolites. Blake was going to St. Jude's. He was going to finish the job. Rowan saw a delivery van idling at a red light, the driver distracted by his phone. She ran, slipping on the wet pavement, and wrenched the back door open. She dove into the cargo hold, landing on a pile of cardboard boxes just as the light turned green. The van lurched forward. Rowan lay in the dark, smelling wet cardboard and fear. She was going back to the hospital. Back to the man she punched. Back to the only place that could clear her name or get her killed. St. Jude's Medical Center was in lockdown. Emily's press conference had caused a media siege at the main entrance. Police lines were holding back reporters, protesters, and conspiracy theorists. But Rowan didn't go to the main entrance. The delivery van stopped at the rear loading dock. As the driver hopped out with his clipboard, Rowan slipped out the back, rolling behind a dumpster. She was soaked, shivering, and dressed in a stolen jumpsuit. She looked like a vagrant. If anyone saw her, security would tackle her in seconds. She needed to get to the 4th floor. Cardiac ICU, VIP wing. She tried the staff entrance keypad. Locked. The code had been changed since she was fired 3 days ago. "Damn it!" she hissed. Then the doors whooshed open. A young orderly texting on his phone walked out for a smoke break. Rowan caught the door with her foot before it closed. She slipped inside. The hospital air hit her controlled, sterile familiar. It centered her. She wasn't a fugitive here. She was a nurse. This was her turf. She navigated the back corridors, avoiding the cameras she knew by heart. She took the service elevator, the one used for hazardous waste and corpses. It smelled of formaldehyde. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, the atmosphere was wrong. It was too quiet. Usually the cardiac wing was a symphony of beeps and murmurs. Now the nurses' station was empty. The lights were dimmed. Rowan crept forward, hugging the wall. She heard voices coming from the far end of the hall. Admiral Sterling's room. 2 DSS agents stood outside the door. They looked nervous. Rowan peeked around the corner. She couldn't get past them, not without a weapon, and she wasn't violent. Then she saw the fire alarm pull station on the wall next to her. She didn't pull it. That would trigger a full evacuation and bring the fire department. Blake would use the chaos to slip away. She needed a medical distraction. She spotted a crash cart parked near the supply closet. She grabbed a bag of saline and a syringe. She squirted the saline onto the floor, creating a massive, slick puddle right in front of the elevator bank. Then she kicked a metal tray down the hall. Clang, clang, clang. The agents jerked their heads. What was that? One of them walked toward the noise. As he rounded the corner, his dress shoes hit the saline puddle. His feet went out from under him. He went down hard, his head cracking against the floor. "Officer down!" the second agent yelled, abandoning his post to run to his partner. Rowan sprinted. She stayed low, dashing past the nurse's station and slipping into the Sterling's room. The room was dark, lit only by the glowing monitors. Admiral Sterling lay in the bed, pale and still. Standing over him was Agent Blake. Blake held a syringe in his hand. He was injecting it into the IV port. "Stop!" Rowan screamed. Blake spun around, eyes wide. He hadn't expected her. "You." Rowan didn't think. She tackled him. She wasn't a fighter, but she was desperate. She slammed her shoulder into Blake's gut, knocking him back against the ventilator. The syringe flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. Blake recovered instantly. He backhanded her a sharp, heavy blow that sent her crashing into the bedside table. Vases and water pitchers shattered. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, Rowan?" Blake snarled, straightening his tie. He pulled a gun from his holster. Rowan scrambled back her hand, landing on a shard of glass. You're killing a hero, Blake. Why? Because heroes are expensive, Blake said, raising the gun. And war is profitable. Sterling was going to cancel the Trident program. He was going to cost us billions. So you poisoned him with crab cakes, Rowan spat, stalling for time. She glanced at the door. Where was Alcott? Where was security? Succinylcholine is elegant, Blake said, stepping closer. Untraceable, until you punched him and ruined the timeline. He knows Blake. He told his daughter. He's confused, Blake said, aiming at her chest. And you're a disgruntled, violent ex-employee who broke in, killed the Admiral, and then was shot by a federal agent in self-defense. It's a clean narrative. Not clean enough, a voice boomed. The door flew open. Dr. Gregory Alcott stood there, looking furious. Behind him were the two DSS agents, guns drawn, but they weren't aiming at Rowan. "Drop the weapon, Blake," one agent shouted. Blake froze. "This woman is an escaped fugitive. She just attacked the patient." "She saved the patient," Alcott roared, holding up a tablet. "I just got the independent labs back from the university hospital. Plasma cholinesterase levels are flatlined. It's poison, Blake. We found the metabolites." Blake's eyes darted between the agents and the window. He was trapped. "You're done," Rowan said, standing up, blood dripping from her lip. "It's over." Blake's face twisted into a sneer. He looked at the Admiral, then at the gun. For a second, Rowan thought he was going to shoot Sterling anyway, just to finish the mission. She threw herself across the Admiral's body, shielding him with her own. Bang! The sound was deafening in the small room. Rowan flinched, waiting for the pain. But it didn't come. Blake dropped the gun. He fell to his knees, clutching his shoulder. In the bed, Admiral Sterling was awake. His hand was gripping the side rail, his knuckles white. He wasn't the one who fired. The DSS agent in the doorway had taken the shot. Blake collapsed, groaning blood, pooling on the sterile white floor. "Secure him!" the agent yelled, rushing in to cuff Blake. Rowan slowly lifted her head. She looked down at Admiral Sterling. His blue eyes were open, groggy but sharp. He looked at Rowan, really looked at her for the first time since that day in the hallway. He reached out a shaking hand and took hers. His grip was weak but warm. "Nice. Right hook." Sterling rasped, a ghost of a smile on his face. Rowan let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry. She squeezed his hand back. "You were crashing, Admiral," she whispered. "I had to improvise." Dr. Alcott rushed to the bedside, checking monitors. "BP is stable. Heart rate elevated but regular. He's okay. Rowan, let me check your head." "I'm fine," Rowan said, wiping the blood from her lip. She looked at Blake, who was being dragged out in handcuffs, cursing. "Is it true?" Sterling asked, his voice gaining strength. "Blake?" "He admitted it," Rowan said. "He wanted to stop you from cancelling the Trident program." Sterling closed his eyes, a look of profound betrayal crossing his face. "I trusted him with my life." "You trusted the wrong person," Rowan said softly. "But you're safe now." The door opened again. Emily Sterling burst in, soaking wet hair plastered to her face. She saw Blake on the floor, the blood, and her father awake. "Dad," she screamed, running to the bed. Rowan stepped back, giving them space. She leaned against the wall, her legs finally giving out. She slid down to the floor, sitting amidst the broken glass and spilled water. She was exhausted. She was an escaped convict. She was fired. But as she watched the Admiral hold his daughter, listening to the steady rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor, a heart she had manually restarted. Rowan Jenkins knew one thing for sure. She was the best damn nurse in the building. 2 weeks had passed since the gunshot rang out in the VIP wing of St. Jude's Medical Center. The rain that had soaked Washington, D.C. that night had been replaced by a crisp, blindingly bright autumn sun. But for Rowan Jenkins, the storm wasn't over. She sat in a mahogany-paneled hearing room inside the Department of Justice. This wasn't a criminal court. The criminal charges had been suspended pending this review. This was a joint disciplinary board, a terrifying hybrid of the State Nursing Board and a Naval Board of Inquiry. The room was packed. Reporters who had called her a monster 10 days ago were now fighting for seats to call her a saint. The narrative had flipped so fast it gave Rowan whiplash, but the board members, 3 stern-faced administrators, and a rear admiral didn't care about public opinion. They cared about protocol. Ms. Jenkins, the chairwoman. A formidable woman named Evelyn Vance adjusted her glasses. We have reviewing the facts. While it is indisputable that Agent Blake, now in federal custody for treason and attempted murder, poisoned Admiral Sterling, we must address your actions. Rowan sat straight, her hands clasped on the table to hide their shaking. Emily Sterling sat next to her, squeezing her elbow for support. You struck a patient, Chairwoman Vance continued, her voice devoid of warmth. You utilized a maneuver, the precordial thump, which has been removed from standard advanced cardiac life support protocols for over a decade due to high risk of injury. You fractured the Admiral's sternum. You operated outside your scope of practice. The board is leaning towards a permanent revocation of your nursing license for gross negligence. A murmur went through the room. Emily stood up. Madam Chair, with respect, the negligence saved his life. The precordial thump was the only option available in a hallway with no equipment. It was reckless, Vance countered. We cannot set a precedent where nurses go around punching patients because they have a hunch. Rules exist for a reason. Rowan felt a cold pit in her stomach. They were going to do it. They were going to clear her of the assault charge, but strip her of her career. She would be a hero who could never work again. If I may, a deep, gravelly voice interrupted from the back of the room. The heavy double doors swung open. The room went silent. Admiral William Bill Sterling did not walk in. He marched. He was leaning heavily on a cane, and his face was still pale, but he was in full dress uniform. The rows of ribbons on his chest caught the light. Admiral, you are not required to be here, the rear admiral on the board stammered, standing up. You are still on medical leave. I'm on leave, not dead, Sterling growled, limping to the witness stand. He didn't sit. He stood gripping the podium, looking every into the warrior who had survived covert ops and boardroom assassinations. He looked at Rowan. He nodded. Then he turned to the board. You're talking about protocols, Sterling said, his voice filling the room without a microphone. You're talking about rules. Let me tell you about the rule of the battlefield. He pointed a finger at Rowan. When I was in the sandbox, we had a saying. The plan doesn't survive first contact with the enemy. 10 days ago, the enemy was inside my bloodstream. It was a chemical weapon designed to stop my heart and end an investigation into $2 billion of stolen taxpayer money. Agent Blake followed the protocol. He followed the rules of engagement for a silent kill. Sterling paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Rowan Jenkins didn't follow protocol. She didn't wait for a crash cart that was behind a locked door. She didn't wait for a doctor who was 3 floors away. She saw a soldier down and she engaged the threat. She broke my sternum. Good. Bones heal. Dead men don't. Admiral, Vance said, her voice softer now. We appreciate your sentiment, but the medical board has standards. Standards. Sterling cut her off. The standard is do no harm. If she had followed your rules, I would be in a flag-draped box at Arlington right now. Instead, I'm standing here ready to testify against the men who tried to sell out this country. He reached into his jacket pocket. I am not a doctor, Sterling said. I cannot grant a medical license, but I am a flag officer of the United States Navy, and I recognize valor when I see it. He walked over to Rowan. The room held its breath. Rowan stood up, trembling. Rowan Jenkins, Sterling said formally. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your own life and career, you went above and beyond the call of duty. He pinned a small, heavy medal onto her simple black blazer. It wasn't a military medal. He couldn't award those to civilians easily, but it was a challenge coin. A solid gold coin with the Navy SEAL trident on one side and the Latin phrase aut viam inveniam aut fasciam on the other. I shall either find a way or make one. The charges against this woman are an insult to every person who has ever saved a life in a crisis, Sterling said, turning back to the board. If you take her license, you'll have to explain to the President of the United States why his new Director of Medical Security is unlicensed. The chairwoman blinked. Director of... Excuse me. I'm creating a new position at the Pentagon. Sterling announced, a wry smile touching his lips. Civilian oversight for naval medical logistics. I need someone who can spot a poison when the doctors see a heart attack. I need someone who isn't afraid to punch a 4-star admiral if he's being an idiot. He looked at Rowan. The job is yours, if you want it. It pays double what St. Jude's pays, and the coffee is better. Rowan looked at the coin on her lapel. She looked at Emily, who was beaming through tears. She looked at the board members, who were hurriedly whispering amongst themselves, realizing they had been outmaneuvered. Rowan started, her voice thick with emotion. I'm a nurse, Admiral. I like taking care of patients. I like the bedside. Then do both, Sterling said. But do it for us. The gavel came down. In light of the testimony, Chairwoman Vance said, sounding defeated, but relieved. The board finds no fault in Ms. Jenkins's actions. The suspension is lifted immediately. The record is expunged. The room erupted in applause. Flashes popped. Rowan didn't hear them. She was looking at Sterling. Thank you, she whispered. No, Sterling said, leaning in close so only she could hear. You gave me back my life, Rowan, and you gave me the chance to clean house. Blake is just the first domino. We're going to take them all down. He winked. Just don't hit me again. 3 months later. Rowan Jenkins walked through the corridors of the Pentagon. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was wearing a tailored suit, the gold challenge coin pinned to her lapel. She carried a tablet with the latest logistics reports. The Trident program had been dismantled. 3 senators had resigned in disgrace. The crab cake conspiracy had become the biggest scandal in a decade. But every Tuesday, Rowan left the Pentagon early. She drove across town to a small veterans clinic in the suburbs, a clinic funded by the Sterling Foundation. There she put on her scrubs. She checked blood pressures. She listened to old soldiers tell stories. She held hands. Because underneath the titles and the drama, she was still a healer. That evening, as she was leaving the clinic, she saw a familiar black sedan waiting. Admiral Sterling rolled down the window. He looked healthy, vibrant, the color back in his cheeks. Hop in, Sterling said. Emily is making dinner. Actual food, not seafood. Rowan laughed, the sound light and free. I'm driving myself, Bill. Suit yourself. Sterling grinned. See you at 700 hours. 700? Rowan confirmed. As she walked to her car, she looked at her right hand. The knuckles were still a little stiff when it rained. A reminder of the moment her life changed. She had punched a man to save him. She had fought the government to save herself. And in the end, she had proven that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is fight like hell. The world called it unbelievable. Rowan just called it a shift. What a ride. From a split-second decision in a hospital hallway to a massive government conspiracy. Rowan Jenkins proved that true heroes don't wear capes, they wear scrubs. Her story reminds us that sometimes following your gut is more important than following the rules, especially when a life is on the line. I want to know what you would have done. If you were in Rowan's shoes, no equipment, no backup, and seconds to spare, would you have taken that swing? Or would you have played it safe? Let me know in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more incredible, true-to-life dramas, mysteries, and survival stories, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.